Hello, everybody.
Hello,
My name's Terry Hooper, and this is,
Dean Hooper.
and we're here to do the second session of the course for the event management and workshop as well afterwards. So we're going to go through the second part today, the two of us, and we'll just do some preliminary things up front, just to set the stage here, the same as we did before with the other parts of this course. So let's just move on. So first off, just go over some general things. The course abstract. So the goals of this course: to increase your knowledge, skills, and capabilities of the individuals and groups involved in managing events, and to plan, organize, and produce safe and successful events that meet the stakeholder needs. The target is community level events with volunteer event organizers that are sanctioned by the Triathlon Provincial Sport, the PSO. The stuff that's in scope is all the triathlon PSOs that are in Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan, and it's covering off indoor and outdoor swim events. And the attendee prerequisites: your organizing experience, none to moderate, and the expectation is that you've taken the provincial technical official 1 and 2 courses so that you're in a trained status, so that way you have that background knowledge. The sources for this content we've pulled from a number of sources. Triathlon Alberta has a document that they produced quite a few years ago. Triathlon BC also has a document that is a checklist document. World Triathlon itself, the world organizing body.
Yeah, that's the event organizing manual, which is got a ton of information in it.
That's right. And also they have a course as well for community level. So that's also been sourced for this, and then personal experience. So myself, I've been a race director in Saskatchewan for a number of races for the Regina Multisport Club. And it'd be the type of race that we're talking about for this event. Plus, I've also done a very similar race out in BC here in the community I'm in Courtenay, BC. And so I'm using that personal experience as well to really get this information.
Haven't had personal experiences as a race director, but I've been living with one.
There you go. And we've also are technical officials, and we've been involved in triathlon and various administrative roles within Triathlon Saskatchewan at the board level and so on. So the course session. So the format, this is what you're experiencing right now: a recorded video, and it will be followed by a live workshop. And session 1 set the stage. So we are using a metaphor in terms of the stage and a play. And the first one was just setting the stage, understanding who all the various actors were involved in the various events. So that's already been done. Sessions 2 through 4 are what we're going through now. So what we're doing now is we're writing the script. What's to happen in this play? When is it to happen? Who's involved? And what things should they be doing? And when? And so we're going to be covering that off. We broke it into 3 parts, and it's pre-event, event days, and post-event that we'll cover off. The task timelines, and we'll have checklists. And we'll make sure that all of the actors that were discussed in the first session are addressed in terms of their wants and needs and expectations. And we'll also have sample templates and examples that we'll be able to give. So the next 3 sessions, this one included, the first session we're covering off today is the event that when you're working on things that are 10 to 5 months prior to the event date itself. So that's what we're going to cover off today. The next 2,
that's when you pretty much have to start.
Yes, because there's quite a few things that if you don't get started, then you're going to be in trouble, and you're going to be behind the 8 ball right away. And so we're going to cover off this one in this session, the 10 to 5 months prior. And then for all 3 of these, there'll be 2 more subsequent sessions after this. We're going to be going through all the items here, but fear not, there's going to be a checklist that's also going to be part of what's produced out of this. So that way, after you're done, you're going to have a checklist of all these items we're discussing right now in that kind of date order. So that way you can make sure you knock off the things when they need to be knocked off. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to just mention here is we're going to be approaching this from the point of view of it's a new event and the things you need to do as part of a new event to get going. There's a lot more work, of course, for creating a new event from scratch as compared to coming in and doing the event again the next year, because a lot of what you worked on can be reused, tweaked, and updated.
Right. But
Yeah.
the timelines pretty much still apply as far as getting the stuff done in priority sequence.
Right. The good things is as you do these things and you're dealing with some of these organizations for the very first time, they're not going to understand what you are looking for and how you want it done. And they're going to be asking a lot of questions, and there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and there's going to be a few fumbled balls and so on during the process that everybody's got to kind of really keep track of. The next time you come in, everybody's got a better idea because it's just a repeat of what they've done before. So we're approaching it from a new event point of view. So 10 months prior. So the first thing on our list is to engage the provincial sport organization. And that's for triathlon, of course. And so you want to talk to them, communicate your intentions about doing the event, and get some initial acknowledgement from the PSO that they understand you're planning to put an event together. And it's about 10 months out from that point, and that you're going to be coming back to them as you start to make progress in organizing it.
But if we can back up, you probably want to make sure that the date for your event is going to coordinate with everything else that the PSO has on their plate.
Right. Yeah, because they'll be aware of other things. They're going to be looking at it from a provincial point of view, so they'll understand that there may be some conflicts and stuff like that. So that's why it's important to engage now rather than later on, so that you don't go ahead and do a lot of planning that turns out you have to change some things because of some information that they held that you didn't really know about. So you want to discuss coordinating of marketing of the event because they will market the event. You want to determine what their PSO fees will be for sanctioning and for the event itself, and because you're going to want to include that in the budget.
Sure.
And they may provide you with key organizational information to address many issues right away. So example is that some provinces, and Saskatchewan, BC, I know for sure, they have timing equipment resources that you can basically talk to them about accessing and using.
You pretty much have to book those though. So
Right.
yeah.
And in Saskatchewan, if you are at a site that is a ways away from a major center and hospital, there's requirements from a safety point of view for ambulances, and they can talk to you about those subsidies. They can talk to you about grant opportunities. BC and Saskatchewan, they both have grant opportunities either directly from the PSO or indirectly because of contacts they have with the provincial organization from within the government. So they can let you be aware of those things so that you can make sure that you keep tabs on those things. And we'll talk about that right away again. And other supporting resources, because they'll have a head coach, they'll have resources as far as officials go, they'll have contacts you could make to help out and so on. So the PSO is a good place to start. Yeah. And you can also discuss other opportunities and their costs and a benefit, for example, of having a provincial, regional, or national qualifying event attached
Right.
to your event. So they can go over that with you for you to decide whether that's actually worthwhile or not. Okay. So as far as the grants go, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you are aware of all the potential grants you could apply for, so you have those revenue items coming in. With a little bit of investment and time done at the right time with the right information supplied, you can get hundreds and thousands of dollars of revenue to help out with your budget.
You just have to be aware of what they are and make sure that you get your application in early so that you know whether you're going to be successful.
Right. So you need to make sure you investigate the availability, timing, and requirements for the government and any PSO funding, because the PSO in Saskatchewan, for example, has funding they can provide as routed through them from the provincial sport organization within the government. And then you just want to set reminders, because you don't want a deadline to slip by without you actually taking advantage of something that you could have had in terms of revenues. The next thing is you want to establish your organization's government credentials. So you'll normally be going in as a nonprofit registration in the type of scenario we're talking about. You're not coming in as a professional race director or race organizer. So if you do that, you would then want to take a look at registering yourself with the provincial government as a nonprofit, so that and in a lot of those cases, if you do that, that's a prerequisite for being eligible for government grants. Um, You also can take advantage of other nonprofit benefits that are available by registering as well. So for example, there's something called TechSoup where you can get software discounts. And sometimes it can affect your standing, can affect whether you have access to facilities from a priority point of view over another organization that's a profit organization.
Right.
And your charges may be different too as a nonprofit.
So every little bit helps to trim that budget.
Right. So the TechSoup, just so you're aware, it's a organization that you can apply to in Canada, and once you supply the required information to validate that you are a nonprofit organization, they then open the door for you to gain access to less expensive software and services, or even free. So, as an example, if you wanted to start setting up your organization so that that way you have your own domain name for your organization, for your event, and you want to start storing documents in the cloud, which we'll talk about later as well, you could go ahead through this process and get a free business account access to something like the Microsoft cloud services and Microsoft Office suite of products and everything like that, or even the Google business account services as well. So that's a potential benefit for sure. And you may need, for your government credentials, you may need to take the time to set up basic organizational reporting. So that would mean that you should have a board with directors. You should have bylaws that are created. You're going to probably have to have an annual AGM, annual general meeting, with minutes and financial statements that will be submitted so that that way you're conforming to the requirements for the government organization. Those are relatively minor, and the benefits you get can be huge. So take that into account.
Just another thing on the list of things to do.
That's right. So, the last thing I was going to mention here is you should also consider the pros and cons of incorporating. I'm not going to go into the detail here, but becoming an incorporated organization is more effort, more cost, but it does have the benefits of limiting some of the exposure you have from a legal point of view and so on. It's dependent on your type of event and organization and whether you want to take that step. So the next thing I have is doing an initial budget. Now, this is a big deal because until you get a fix on your revenue and expenses and where you're going to end up, you don't know if you're going to end up at the end of all of this being in the hole or with a tidy profit or breaking even or whatever. So you need to start right at the get-go by creating an initial budget and then building it. The budget, when you take a look at it, you're going to have to keep track of things like, variable expenses versus fixed expenses. So for example, the more participants you get in the door, the more shirts you're going to have to buy, for example, and the more income you're going to have. But there's some things that are a fixed expense no matter what happens, right? So, for example, if you're going to have a website, you're going to have a website no matter how many people. It could be one person that comes to your event or 2,000. The website is going to be a fixed expense no matter what. So you should also, when you're setting up things, consider setting it up so that way later on, if you have to do any kind of reporting for your grants and so on, set them up in a way that makes it easy for you to go ahead and transfer the numbers across to the format or the breakdown that they want for those grants, okay, rather than spending a lot of time reworking what you've done. The budget is going to change and evolve over time, right up until after the event itself, because you're going to have things come in the door, unexpected things. You're going to have things come in the door that your original budget amount was too high or too low for whatever reason. So it's a living document that's going to be created now, and it's just going to evolve over time. So I've got an example of a spreadsheet. I'll show you right away. You're going to see some of these things I mentioned here too. The other thing I want to mention that I keep track of as well is any pertinent details that are associated with a certain expense. So for example, I might put in there as notes that if I have a food expense, that I bought this many platters of wraps and this many chocolate milks for the kids and so on.
Right.
So that way, the next year, when I take that budget from the previous year, carry it across, I've got something that's a quick and easy reference to go ahead and budget for the next year and then consider whether I have to change things accordingly. And you may need to supplement this budget that you're creating in an Excel spreadsheet, for example, with some bookkeeping services software. So, for example, the event I have right now, I I have a budget. It's in Excel, but I also use QuickBooks, and so I use QuickBooks to keep track of all the money coming in and out as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it lets me go ahead and create a standard set of financial statements too. And of course, you can reuse this for the next year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to um, show you, let me just bring it up here, a budget sheet I have. So I'll bring it here, and then let me bring this in here. Just a little more. So here's my budget sheet that I have. So right at the top, I have all the different categories I would have. This is a registration as of a certain date and how many people I had. And then I was trying to figure out, okay, well, how is it matching my budget? And I was thinking, well, as of like it was 2 weeks before, I expect to see another 1.4 of each one of these because there's a last week rush or whatever coming in. And that's my budget number that I have here, and it's being adjusted over time. Later on, when I actually have the real numbers, I'll plug them in here, and then I can see what the differences are in terms of the number of people that actually register for these different categories. But that comes into play when I look at the revenue, because then if I'm trying to budget, what am I getting for revenue for each one of these categories as well? There's a budget amount, there's the actual amount. And then I have all these other revenue sources as well. I have a BC government sports grant, a local sport relief fund. I have a title sponsor, gold sponsors. We'll talk about the different categories of sponsors and how to do that soon. And I have certain revenues coming in for that. And then some of them are in-kind sponsorship. I still list them. This would have the actual sponsor name in here with no amount, but I would have an in-kind. So that way I recognize that I'm getting some benefit from a revenue point of view from a sponsor, even though it's not actual money. I'm getting something from them, right?
It affects your overall number.
Right. And when I have the event take place the next year, it's listed here, so I know that I was getting a benefit from them to make sure that I follow up on that benefit by getting that sponsor back again for that, or replacing it with another sponsor to get that same benefit again. So here I've got a food sponsor, so I got revenue came in from them. This was kind of an in-kind sponsorship because I also had expenses, but they offset that. So they gave me some money to use against my expenses for the food that I ordered from them. And then here I have an event partner. So our equipment that we use for our event here is actually also used by another event that takes place a number of months later. And so they compensate for the use of that equipment by supplying our event with some revenue. And then so I got the total revenue and then the expenses. So I have legal expenses. Once again, this is a fixed expense, for example, because this is the nonprofit registration, website, bank fees. You can see them all going down here. So I have all of these budgeted at the start of the year. And then eventually I plug in the real numbers here. And then this last column is basically taking a look at my budget versus my actual and coming up with the difference between. So I'll have a negative difference here if I actually had less spent on a certain item than I expected. And up in the revenues, I'll have the corresponding up here based upon what I got for revenues versus what I thought I was going to get for revenues. And if I go all the way down here, this column here is where I have some of my additional information. So this says equipment. Well, what did equipment include? So you can see here I have notes here that it included, signage and stuff from Canadian Tire and extension cords and stuff from Home Hardware and so on. So that way I have all of that information here if I want a quick and easy reference to it. And so on, going down. And then at the bottom, I have my total expenses, and then I have my net income. So my budget net income was $500 and change. The actual was that, and this was the difference. So for that event, I came out about $1,100, in the black, compared to starting off from zero. So that's good. And then on the final thing I have that I'll scroll over so you can see is I also, in this case, kept track. A lot of the stuff I bought myself, so I kept track of these expenses coming in and made sure I paid myself.
Yeah.
And when that took place. And then if it was like an e-transfer to the PSO, this would be for some of the expenses. Yeah. I have marked that in there when that took place. So that way I make sure all of these expenses have been taken care of. Right. And paid for.
Because in the heat of organizing for an event, those expenses are the ones that can disappear pretty easily, and then you have no idea.
Yeah, that's right. So here, so I'm going to get rid of this, go back to our discussion.
This will be available for them, right?
Yeah, we'll make it available so that way you can use it as a template to get yourself going. You can just replace everything.
If nothing else, it gives you a really good list of all the things that you need to consider in your budget.
Right. Okay, so let's return here. So document management. So you're going to have a lot of documents associated with your event. And some people, when they start off, they put them on their computer hard drive, and then their hard drive crashes and then they've lost all the documents, or suddenly they need to delegate work and all the documents are kind of strewn all over the place between people's computers and so on. So one of the things I would say right from the get-go is consider using a cloud service, something like Google with its Drive, or Microsoft with OneDrive. SharePoint might be a little overkill, but you could use SharePoint as well for this size of event, I mean. And there's other products as well. But by using a cloud service, then you can make sure that everything is off a computer so it doesn't get lost in terms of the hard drive crashing or something like that.
Or corrupted by everybody trying to make changes, and then you don't know which one is the latest version.
Right, because by having it in the cloud, multiple people could actually go in and edit the single document at the same time, or multiple people can go in and edit different documents all on the same drive as well from different computers. So it's got some real benefits. Okay, so to centralize your documents in one place, control the access to who you need to, and allow collaboration between people. So I'll show you an example right away, but what I do is, because I've run this event, and this event has been going on for many years, I've only been running it for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years now.
3, I think.
Yeah, COVID kind of always throws my counts out. But I reorganized what I had before because it wasn't organized that way very well. So that way I have all the past years that I can go back to and I can look at. Because if somebody says, hey, 10 years ago, what was your registration numbers? Well, I can go back and look at that. Not an issue. And then so I organize it by year and then by organizational area. And then I have all the documents in there, including financial and banking record documents and receipts. So everything's in one place. And also I have a public area. So that way, if I have documents that I need to make available to the general public, like, and I'll show you Athlete's Guide, for example.
Volunteer Guide.
Right. I can put that into that same space in a special folder that's given general access to anybody on the internet without having to log in and authenticate. And then that way I can actually replace those documents when I want to with an updated version. Yeah. So that way the links that everybody's using to get at that document are the same links, but they're actually retrieving the replaced version that's now updated of that document.
And I guess early on, it's really good to let your athletes and your volunteers and the people that are helping you organize this event know that those documents are also a living document. So expect changes. We've had incidents where an athlete will look at the athlete's guide like 3 months before the event and then come to the event and the time changed on when their particular age category started and they missed their start.
Right. So here, let me show you an example here. So this is in Google Drive. This would work the same as in Microsoft OneDrive. That's the way you wanted to go. But you can see here I have a drive that I can share with a whole bunch of people if I want within the organization. And I got it by year. You can see here right now. So if I go to 2023, which is last year's, I go into that, you can see I have folders within here. So in the admin folder, if I go into that, for example, I've got my society registration, I've got the organizer's guide, which I'll talk about right away, some surveys that I have, so I can go back to them and so on. And if I go back up, you can see here I've got equipment information, stuff about the facilities. So that like have contract information in there. The finances is going to have the bank statements and receipts and so on. Participants information is going to have all my membership, or sorry, my registration information is going to be in there. And here I got one, you can see here, this has got a special designation to show that it's got special access. So it's open to the public, this folder.
Yeah.
So if I go into there, you can see I've got an athlete's guide document in here and a volunteer guide document. This is exactly what we were talking about, is I can have a link that points to this. And so I have references that say, click on this to access the athlete's guide. And I just replace it if I have to update it. Right. The other thing I have in here is I have photos and videos. So for example, for my event, I've collared the local camera club, and they've sent about 5 people out, and they take all kinds of photos. And then just to make them generally available to people after the event, I just copy them into here and let people access them with a link from my website, and they can get out all the photos. So that makes it easy for me to go ahead and make those available. So that's an example here of organizing things using a cloud drive. So what's the next item here?
Setting the date.
Setting the date. Okay, so
hopefully for setting the date, I know in Saskatchewan that they were Yvonne was trying to get a meeting early on so that everyone could sort of say what date they wanted to put their event in. And I think that's a really, really good idea, so that people aren't having events in 2 different, like Saskatoon and Regina have an event on the same day.
Right. So they'll set that up, but I put it here for 10 months prior, just so that you can at least have it on your list. So the idea here is communicate with the PSO so that they're aware that you're planning an event and what date it's going to be on. This will, you want to avoid conflicting with other events.
Right. Work with the other race directors to make sure you're not overlapping.
That's right. Like within the province, or because, people will travel within the province, but they won't travel if they have a conflict of 2 different events happening at the same time. You want to consider holidays, because people will travel and would be with their families and so on. So you may have a reduced registration. You want to consider the day of the week and the time for the locale that you're going to have the event at. So let's say it's out, it's an event that's happening out in a local community,
like a fishing derby if you're having an open water swim.
Right. So for example, you have it on a Saturday afternoon and the community is having a farmer's market. So then that's not going to work out very well, because you're going to have all that traffic you're going to have to deal with for the bike course. So the other thing too is also understand the risks for the time of year that you're going to have it. So open water temperature, there's restrictions on terms of it being too cold. And then also the water quality, because if you try and get into a lake and it's late in the summer season, you may find that the water quality is too poor and your event may then have to go without the swim.
Yeah.
Okay, so keep those in mind when you're setting the tentative date. All right. Next thing. Oh, got ahead of myself again. Course layout and facility. So some of the things to think about around this. So one of the things is you're going to have a package pickup. So you're going to want to make sure that wherever you're going to have that, you kind of have that reserved, or you've talked to someone about reserving that. And oftentimes, if you've got a title sponsor, they will offer up space at their location so that you can have the package pickup there. But when we talk about the event itself, the swim, if you're doing an open water swim, you want to reserve the use of the beach and all the locations facilities. So
washrooms, space on the grass to put up your transition area,
right,
access in and out for the bike course, all kinds of things.
Right, and they may have log booms out in the water, or they may have
restrictions of where the fishing boats go.
Right.
Yeah.
Or they may have, other things that they rent, and they have to be aware that they won't be able to have those people rent and use the space. So,
Right.
for example, if they rent like canoes, or if they
Mhm.
have like little water pedal boats and
Yeah.
stuff like that,
Yeah.
this is important to make sure that everybody is aware long in advance, and then that is time is set aside. If it's a pool, you have to reserve the use of the pool, obviously.
Right.
The pool use can be a very expensive budget item, and it should be contracted as soon as possible to make
Yeah.
sure you don't have any conflicts.
Because along with the pool, you have to have your lifeguards too.
That's right. But you don't want to go ahead and suddenly find out that you thought you would have the pool, and
Mhm.
someone has booked
Yeah.
in a swim meet for
Yeah.
that weekend, or something like that, or it's not even open, for example. So, or they're going to have maintenance, for example. So you want to do that soon, and it is expensive to book pools. So you want to make sure you know what that amount's going to be, so that it's part of your budget. So the area for transition, you want to make sure you take a look at what the transition flow considerations could be. Because, for example, if you're going to have the transition set up, you going to want to make sure that space is reserved and somebody else isn't booking in, like let's say a family picnic or something like that,
Yeah.
and suddenly you can't use the area you thought. Um, and then you have to also consider that if you're having the transition somewhere and there's not enough toilets available at the site itself for some reason, that
Yeah.
you're going to have added expenses there for portable toilets and for servicing those. Another budget item. This is all about making sure you don't go in the hole for a lot of these things, right? For the roads, for the bike course, you need to make sure you lay out a course for that. Generally speaking, you can just go on to Google Maps or something like that and lay out the course on there,
Right.
so that you have a general idea, so that when you go to talk to any kind of organizations that you need to refer to what your plans are, you at least have a general map that you can look at, that everybody can pore over and understand what you're trying to do and where you're trying to do it. Um, and the same thing with the paths and roads you would have for running
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
So you want to, when you talk to all these various organizations that you're going to be using facilities through, you want to make sure they pencil in dates. The facility operators do, and also in municipal or provincial departments that are involved, like a Ministry of Transport or something like that, or the city or town, and to avoid potential conflicting bookings.
And this is a really important one too, to follow up with them, like check every whatever month or so to make sure that they haven't let this slip through a loophole and forgot that you had booked this
Yeah,
event.
this can happen, especially if it's your first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, make sure you touch base with them, especially 2 or 3 months before your event. And we'll cover that when we get to that point. That's that session, because you want to make sure that, like Arlene says, it hasn't slipped through somewhere. And also, that will help to ensure that if they're thinking of doing any kind of maintenance on the roads and stuff like
Right.
that that your use of that is taken into account, so that you don't turn up on event day
And they're paving the
and they're
road.
paving the road, which has happened. So
And you may also have to contact them ahead of time to fix potholes and stuff like that.
yeah,
So,
this is all something we'll cover in a future session, but at this point in time, it's just really engaging them and getting that known. So the next thing, reserving the race equipment. Okay, so
yes.
there's a lot of equipment involved in doing a triathlon or a duathlon or whatever event, multi-sport event. And there's a lot of stuff that's usually in a race trailer. So you want to make sure that if you need the equipment and it's in a trailer that's overseen by a certain organization, that you've talked to them and you've booked it, so that way you know that it's reserved for you for your use. You may have that as a budget item again, because some organizations may charge for it, because they have to cover wear and tear on the trailer and any equipment in it and so on. And some examples of what you might be dealing with here are, if you're in the open water, for example, for a swim, you'd have swim buoys and anchors that would have to be in there. You're going to have bike racks that are part of this, fencing for the transition. There'll be signs saying, run this way, swim out swim in, whatever, right? All these different signs. You're going to have volunteer safety vests that you're going to want to hand out to everybody, a finish arch. There'll be office supplies like clipboards, for example. There may be a radio system. There may be a PA system.
Generator.
Yeah. So there'll be lots of different equipment that will make up your race, and we'll get to all the different equipment in a future session. But you want to make sure that you have those set aside so you're not scrambling. Okay. All right. That was 10 months prior. So 10 and 9 months, I guess. You start out in 10 months prior. So that now we're into the 8 months prior. So the first thing I would say here that you want to make sure you deal with is getting your communications platform set up. If this is a new event, this will be from scratch. If it's an old event, it'll mean making sure that everything's there and updating it. Yeah. So we're talking about your website is one of your prime sources that you're going to want to make sure is maintained. Your email account, if you have your own domain name and so on, make sure that's set up. And distribution. So you don't want to go ahead and start distributing all these emails to dozens or hundreds of participants from the email account, because sooner or later you're going to get flagged as spam, as a spam source. So you're going to want to take a look at something like MailChimp or some other service like that. Omnisend. I think there's a number of different products you can use that basically are a distribution system. You upload all the people you want to send stuff to, you tag them, for example, as to whether they're current event registrants or past event, and then you can, target your emails accordingly. But that way, it makes it easier managing for you as well, all these communications. Facebook is another one. You probably set up Twitter, a Twitter feed, an X, I guess now, and Instagram is another source as well. So when you set these up, I just want to emphasize, be very careful you set them up to ensure the access is well secured. I've seen before other organizations, they were kind of flippant with the password they used. It was too easy and somebody guessed it. And then all of a sudden someone hacked into it, took it over, and they lost control of a Facebook page, for example. And then they tried to contact Facebook Meta, and they could never get through, and they could never recover it, and they had to start from scratch. So all those people that had become people that were monitoring that Facebook page now were monitoring a hacked one, and they had to start from scratch. So just take your time, make sure it's set up properly. And on all of these communication platforms, this is the point where you could pre-announce the event. You want to make sure that you refresh your website if you're having it for a second year, for example, so it doesn't look like your website's gone dead, your event's gone away, because it's all having previous events information in there. And so you want to archive all the previous event year's information so people can get at it if they need to, and indicate when the next event is in the planning stage, and maybe provide the tentative date so people can start to think about putting it in their calendar. Okay. The next thing I have here is start with creating an overall organizer guide. This is going to be your central document for depositing all the event organization and management information, including contacts, event setup, the dates, times, a whole litany of information. It can also be used as a source, as a base document, so that when you go to create some other guides that we're going to describe later on, captain's guide, a volunteer guide, an athlete guide, and you have that as a copy and paste source to set up these other guides. And you can also use it to communicate sections to your partners. So for example, if you have a section in there about the traffic control, they're going to want to know about what's expected in the maps, right? Yep. And so you'll take that section and copy it into a separate document and send it to them. And the same thing with security and for medical services. So let me just show you an example of a organizer's guide document I have. This is kind of a work in progress right now for this year for my event. But you can see here, less than the size of this. You can see here that this is my organizer's guide. And in here, if you look at the table, now I'll make this bigger so you can see it better. So here's my table of contents. It gives you a rough idea of the content. So I have my race categories. I have information about what the volunteer kit is going to be, that the volunteers all get, what the participants will get, the race schedule, a summary for the public, the run sheet, with course cutoff times in here, venue information about parking and so on, safety information, timing, check-in information, the swim information for the swim captain, bike information, the run information, the finish information, everything about the draw, lunch, and awards. And if you go into here, you can see I've got all the details here in terms of, for every category I'm running, what ages, what's the planned start time, what's the distances they're doing. And, I use wristbands to control who is on the course and being able to recognize them. But this is a really good way to make sure you have everything in one place that you can copy and paste into the other documents. Okay. So I'll close this as my example. Okay, so the next thing is confirm your core volunteers and engage them. So your core volunteers have been working really hard for you if you're repeating an event. So it's kind of like, talking to the mom right after they had a baby about having the next baby right away again. We give them a little time to mellow out and, enjoy the fact that they did well and they're looking forward to coming and doing it again. So, but once you go and talk to them, determine what your key dates are going to be for the various involvement of the different core volunteers, and then reach out to them and confirm their commitment for the next event.
Okay? So that they can plan.
Well, that's right. They can plan their calendar and be there to support you. And if they don't come back, then now's the time to start looking for replacements. Yeah. The next thing, sponsorship, confirmation, and capturing. Okay. So for a new event, my advice would be if you know the participants that are going to be coming out that are local and are really keen in terms of doing the event, they have a connection to a business that may sponsor, then those are your go-to. Yeah, those are your go-to people to say, hey, is there anything you can do to help me get sponsorship to support this event so we can make it go, right? And that is your go-to. I've always found that's the case. The best go-tos for sponsorship. So consider the businesses that offer sponsorship and when and where they should be contacted. Because sometimes they don't want to be contacted until a certain date, because they have a certain process that doesn't start up for sponsorship until this date. And sometimes it's online, sometimes it's just by email. So find that out, how they want to be engaged for that. And be aware of any business requirements. Some of the sponsors I have, they need to have, from a corporate point of view, something in hand that explains what they're sponsoring and making sure that the funds are allocated to something that is understood. Yeah,
or legit.
Yeah, that's right. And then you can also get back from them if they have any branding recognition expectations or follow-up reporting they want, and so on. Find all that stuff out. For a repeat event, circle back and provide all the information about how successful your event has been. We'll talk about surveys and how that can be used in the last session, the impact they had, and request a commitment for upcoming the event for budget and solidification. So that way you know what you're getting for revenues, you can count on it. Come up with a sponsorship tier package with a listing of benefits, and I'll show an example of that right away, and determine what commitments the sponsors are providing and insert it into your budget and logistical plans.
Like, we're really fortunate because one of our sponsors provides their office for race registration.
Right. And they also provide some of their staff for volunteers.
Yeah.
So you can ask about that kind of engagement as well.
Their staff actually have quite a bit of fun at the event.
That's right. So here, for example, for the event that I'm running here, I'm going to bring in something here for us to look at. I'll take this, make it so show more. So here I have these various tiers of the event, all the way up from a community partner, all the way up to title sponsor, and the funding commitment associated with each one. and a half of their in-kind value. So if they have in-kind sponsorship they're doing, I equate it to half of that value to these tiers as well. And you can see here, I've got all the different features that can be had for the different tiers here, and the check marks show what they get. So you can give this to a sponsor so they can make an informed decision as to
where they want
to be and what kind of benefits they want to be get out of being a sponsor. Okay, so that's an example there too. Provide that later on too. The next thing is
medical expenses.
Determine and book medical services. So you want, first responder and first aid capabilities. You want to book this early to ensure commitment, because these people will be booked and then unavailable if you don't do it soon enough.
And this is another one that it's really important to do a follow-up to make sure that your request doesn't fall through the cracks.
Right, exactly. So this may be a significant budget expense to consider. Some of them take honorariums, so that it's a little manageable, but you still want to give them something that's going to attract them to coming back again the next year, right? So some options that we've used in the past, St. John Ambulance has been an option. The ski patrol we used to use in Saskatchewan as an option. They were good.
They said they needed to be, they needed to keep up their skills, so they were appreciative of coming out to the triathlon events.
Yeah, and they had fun too. So it was kind of a a way for the organization to have a kind of a fun event for everybody to get together in the summer when they're not actually on the hill. If you're having an open water swim, you're going to have to determine what marine safety personnel and watercraft have to be booked in advance for the event date. Yeah,
lifeguards.
Right, and you may need something, you may need some water patrol out there, or RCMP boats or whatever, depending on your situation. You can work through with the PSO and the technical delegate when they're on board to figure out exactly what you need and make sure they're brought on board. But this also includes lifeguards as well for the open water swim. Okay, so that's done at this time too, booking all that. Okay, now we're 6 months prior. So now we talk about the PSO sanctioning and the TD assignment. So we've already talked to the PSO once.
Yes.
Or twice. And at this point, you're going to be going into the sanctioning process and starting to fill out some initial sanctioning information that you're going to need to kind of nail down prior to opening registration. And so you'll want to send that into the PSO so that they have it in hand. They'll assign a technical delegate, an official, a TD, in other words, as the events liaison to the PSO to work with you. And the TD is going to offer a review of all your plans to the preliminary sanctioning point in time that you've just submitted and make sure everything's there. And the thing I wanted to mention is the key here is that the preliminary sanctioning information that is to be reviewed before registration opens is to save any kind of issues with opening registration with information that needs to change because it doesn't follow the rules or there's some issue with it. And your TD can make sure that that initial information is well known and correct so that way you don't have to backtrack. Yeah. Because you don't want people registering and then all of a sudden regret registering because something has changed that given the change, they may not have registered and then they're going to complain. So the TD will ensure any draft publication, they're going to review any draft publication of information that you have, including the registration configuration to make sure that it's all compliant with the rules and standards before releasing to public, the ages, the distances, and so on. And they're going to provide feedback on involvement and experiences with other events, based on their experience, the TD's experience with other events they've had in other jurisdictions, and whether that's within the province, within Canada, or even internationally. So they'll bring all that experience to bear to help you out. And the TD will also manage and coordinate involving all the other technical officials that might be involved for that event as well. Yeah. So you don't have to worry about organizing that. They organize all the other technical officials. The next thing I have here is booking traffic control. So, working with traffic control services is often a complicated and time-consuming task. So you want to get this started early now and work with them. And you often need to book them well in advance because they get busy with construction and everything else. So
Yeah.
you want to make sure that, and you're coming in and you're trying to, leverage your nonprofit to get a little better deal from them. So, if you don't get in there, they're going to look at a construction job as being more profitable and may not be interested if you come in too late to ask for it.
And again, follow up, follow up, follow up.
Yeah. So it's a limited resource, so book it well in advance. It's going to be required for many situations for safety on open or closed courses for the bike and sometimes the run. And it may be required to have the traffic control in place and designated for you to actually get permits from the municipal or provincial bodies, organizational bodies. So that's why it's important to have them. So their involvement can also affect your bike and run route planning. So get them involved so that way you have that as a reference when you're getting that organized. It can also be
your budget.
a very large expense, the traffic control services. Like we're talking thousands of dollars here. So you want to make sure that everything's kind of nailed down so you've got that in your budget because that could affect fees. So you don't want to go ahead and open registration with fees that are too low, and then you're in a hole right away because you didn't take this into account. Okay. So you want to begin marketing now. So people that make early calendar planning need to be captured at this time. You might think, well, this is way too early. People aren't interested. There'll be people that are interested, and you don't want to take a chance. You're going to lose some participants just because you didn't accommodate their need to organize themselves sooner.
We have to book holidays and travel plans
that's
sometimes.
True. Yeah, that's right. So you want to provide general information about the event when you begin marketing it. That's been vetted by the TD. So like the date, time, location, race categories, and expectation as to when registration would open. So use all the communication channels that have been previously established earlier. And the PSO can also market to their distribution list as well. So you can just get the word out. At this point, you also want to select your source for event food. Now you're thinking, hold on, like 6 months before my event, really? Yeah. But the big thing here is this can be a super large expense to be budgeted, and it could affect your fees. So you want to nail this down and know what you're dealing with in terms of this expense. That being said, when you talk to these people, you can often talk to them about the idea of some sort of sponsorship in kind to try and cut down that expense.
Even if it's partial.
Right. So make sure you have that as part of your conversation with them so that way the expense is managed. The next thing I have here is about booking timing. So if some events, it's a small event and you want to just use manual timing, that takes extra volunteers. It takes extra work in terms of transcribing the information if you want to actually capture the timing and then issue it later on. If you're going to do manual timing, just keep that in mind. It's extra work as well. It's not like it's nothing. But if you're going to use electronic timing with chips and so on, you need to often book that well in advance because that is usually a limited resource. All right. And it can be a large expense again to be budgeted, and it could affect fees again. If there's a provincial timing equipment resource, like some of the provinces, like Saskatchewan, BC, I know for sure, they have timing equipment that you can actually reserve, assuming that somebody else isn't get a priority over you on that, and that could save you some expenses. But you need to make sure that that's done now too, or whenever they say you can start reserving that. And like I said, that's a big budget item as well. The last thing I have here is 6 months prior. If you're going to be doing something with schools and clinics, like if your event will include kids or a youth component, now is a good time to go ahead and see if you can start engaging those schools at this time. You should look to see what kind of resources might be available from the PSO, like any kind of training programs or clinics that you can basically offer up to the schools in the district that you're having the event in, so that way they don't have to create or do a lot of work. And they can just leverage what you have and integrate it with their programs they're doing with their school districts, okay, and their schools. So contact the local districts to see if there are resources looking for programs for their schools for this kind of thing, like for sports. And then, The administrators may be interested in this, teachers, and the students. So just try and get the word out. The PSO may also offer local clinics to support this event as well.
Yeah.
So
especially for kids, because they may not have a lot of knowledge about
right, right. So check on that as well. So they may offer it for athletes, coaching as well, and for officials training. And the schools may also have programs to provide community volunteers.
Right. But if you're going to use the schools for volunteers, it's really important to give them some training and maybe separate them so that they're not just chumming with their buddy.
Yeah, and they're ignoring the race that's going on behind their back. And then the last thing I have here, and something that we're doing out here for our event is we actually have the t-shirts that we would be giving out to the participants and the volunteers. We have a t-shirt design contest that we send out to the schools, and we'll get dozens of submissions back, and so it kind of creates some enthusiasm within the community, within the schools and stuff like that.
There's a competition between the schools.
And then you pick the design, and that can be used, you can tweak it a bit and so on as to fit your needs. It can be used and supplied to your t-shirt vendor to put on the front as your design. So it becomes a very homegrown, homegrown environment, and it generates buzz, right? So that's good too. So the one we do is limited to ages 5 to 13. So really just elementary school kids. Okay, 5 months prior. We're getting closer. So the next thing, book security. So overnight security. So a lot of times you're going to try and get a jump on things for a race day by coming in the day before. So let's say your race day is on the Sunday. You might on the Saturday come out and get your transition set up, all the bike racks set up with the fencing around and stuff like that. So you're not having to do that early race day morning. So if you
have athlete check in the day before,
right,
their bikes,
that too. So the thing is, from a security point of view, there's not a lot of value to these bike racks, but people can come along and just
damage them.
Yeah. So you might want to just book some security that comes in and checks every once in a while to make sure nothing's happening with that. But you really need to do it if you're going to get a jump on things by letting people check in their bikes in a transition the day before, because of course
they have to be on site for that,
right,
24/7,
right, with lights and all kinds of things. So that really ups the expense if you're going to do that kind of thing. But the security needs to be booked a long ways in advance to make sure that they are available too. And once again, there'll be an expense in your budget that you need to factor in.
Keep tabs on them, remind them.
That's right. Okay. So the next thing I have here is you want to source all of the expensive race items that you're going to be dealing with. And these are items that will add up in expenses and may affect your budgeted fees again. So some examples here. Clothing, like t-shirts. I've just gone through this with my supplier. So they had cotton and I had polyester, but the polyester was X amount more than the cotton. And then printing, how many colors are you printing? And then how much are you ordering, because you'll get bulk pricing or not, and is this just for participants or is it for volunteers as well? All of these things, that is a big expense. The shirts like this can be thousands of dollars as well. So you want to make sure that is figured out well in advance from a budgeting point of view. For another reason, from another reason that we'll talk about right away from our registration, you want to figure it out in advance as well. But we'll talk about that in a second. What were you going to say?
You've got bibs, swim caps, bike numbers, race belts, wristbands, participation medals. And some of these things can be ordered in bulk so that you have them for a number of years.
Right. And you got tattoos that you might want to use and put on people because that looks flashy, for their number. And you might want to have trophies, and so on. Right. And then the medals, besides participation, which one to everybody, which adds up.
Yeah.
But then you have the lanyard that happens. And then you have the podium, gold, silver, and bronze, depending on how many categories you have, male and female, and the different age groups and so on. Those can all add up, to a lot of money. So you got to make sure you've sourced them, what your costs are, those are budgeted, right?
Or signage, which you have to have for turn left here, turn right, 5 5K marker, 10K marker.
Right. You turn around here if you're doing the 5K loop for the bike or run
Yeah.
or whatever, right? Those, if you don't have those, especially your first year,
Yeah.
those can be hundreds and hundreds of dollars to get made up properly as well. And
A lot of times you have to rent a van to get all of your equipment from one place to the other. So that's another expense as well, as the rental of a van and the gas.
right, right. So you go ahead and you get a U-Haul van, which is extremely helpful and
Yeah.
useful. But you rent it for a few days, a couple of days, and you're looking at hundreds of dollars for that too, right? For all those things Marlene just said. So make sure you go through and you get those sourced. You could book the U-Haul van, for example, in advance, and booking in advance is not a bad thing, so you know it's available. The next thing is you want to resolve any registration. So we're getting ready for registration here. So any kind of registration dependencies that you have. So I talked about the clothing, like the t-shirts. You're going to want to nail all those things down, because once you choose a particular line of t-shirt, for example, they will have a particular sizing guide that goes with that.
You want to send that out with your registration
Yeah,
so that, yeah.
yeah. You want people choosing when they register. You don't want to go back 2 months later and say, hey, what size do you need? And then you have to deal with all the administration of that, and getting a hold of people and making sure they reply and blah, blah, blah. Right. So, yes, make sure that you get the t-shirts and clothing information nailed down so that you can include that sizing information as part of your registration. The age categories.
And distance, we kind of talked about that. And the TD should help you with that. So.
Right. They'll know all that information. Package pickup date.
Time and location.
Right. Race category. The check-in times that will be on race day, and the start times.
Yeah.
What's the general course layout, okay, that we are going to have?
And cutoff times for everything: swim, bike, run, and the finish. Cutoff times are really important especially for new athletes, so that they can make sure that they can complete the event and not have to be pulled from the course.
That's right, because there's nothing worse than somebody going, applying and going in for a standard distance, and they're not a good swimmer, and then they are pulled from the course before they've even done their swim. So that they'll register with that cutoff time in mind. That all of these things we're talking about, of course, are important to have nailed down and explained when you open registration somewhere, so that people are making an informed decision about registering. I've got other things here too. So if you have an early bird close date, some events use that to incent people to come in and get a little discount and register early. But things like a guaranteed t-shirt sizing, because sooner or later you got to pull the plug on ordering up those t-shirts and the sizes. And so that's a way of making sure that people know, get it in by this date. Okay. So they need to know about that early bird. And then the registration close date. When are they going to be out of gas? And sometimes you can also put in there what your capacity limits are for certain events, so that they know that registration may close sooner than that date if they start to fill up. Okay. So when you set that close date, just keep in mind the time needed to compile the start lists that are going to be used for the swim and the various starts, and that those have to be provided to timing, and they have to compile that. So you don't create havoc for yourself by setting the close date as the day before the event, because that's just setting up, stomach acid for yourself. So, right. So the next thing I have here is create your online registration. So this isn't actually opening it. This is just creating it. Okay. So, you want to use your current, stable, and what you're mostly confident in for your budget to determine your fees at that point. Okay. That's why you've done all this budget work way in advance. And so you have to determine who's going to pay the online registration fee. Is it going to be the participant, or are you going to absorb that as the event? And how do they pay the PSO and Tri-Can fees? Consider coordinating that with the PSO for membership requirements, because it's for insurance, and the fees associated. And if you use something like CCN registration system that's used by the PSOs, then if you do your registration in that same service, that same product, you can
Usually includes everything.
it integrates with the PSO. So that way they can choose to have an event day membership or an annual membership, and or it recognizes them already having an annual membership. And so that way it's all done in one stroke rather than you having to administer coordinating that and synchronizing that and reconciling that later on. Okay, so consider that just for your ease. For the first time, it can be complex setting this thing up with different fees and age group categories and teams and waivers and payment services, and capacity limits and so on. So give yourself some time to work through it with the vendor. It's going to take time. After that, hopefully you can just clone the previous year's configuration and tweak it. Okay. You're going to need to think about embedding questions about swim times if you're having an indoor pool swim.
Right.
And you want to make sure you allocate lanes so people aren't swimming over top of each other, because you've got a fast swimmer with a slow swimmer in the same lane when they start. Okay. You might want to have questions related to trophies you're going to have. Like if you have we have a trophy here, for example, for most participation of the school. Right. So there's a question in there that put your school name in here so that we can track that and we can have that trophy based on that. You're going to create a store maybe for your clothing so that way they can choose what sizing, and you can put a link in there that goes to the vendor sites so that they can look at the measurements and pick the right size for themselves, so you're not having to deal with that yourself. Once you do that, test all of the registration paths, okay, before it's actually opened up, and make sure everything's working properly. I have never had a case yet where I haven't had an issue and I haven't had to go back to the registration vendor and they've had to tweak and correct something so that way everything's working properly. You don't want to discover that after people are registering, because then you're dealing with all kinds of issues from all kinds of people at the same time. Make sure that you figured out what the registration open date will be and put in what the close date is going to be, and know in advance how you're going to handle refunds when they're requested. Most times,
or if you're going to allow them, and if you don't, make sure that that's clearly indicated so people are aware.
That's another thing that's important to put on your registration information before people register, is that. Take a look at some contingency plans, though, what you might have to happen. You might want to work this out with a vendor. Look what happened with COVID, right? For example. So if you got something that's like way out of left field, you know how you're going to be dealing with that and the costs that might come in with that too. Okay. The next thing is draft a volunteer guide. And I've already shown you the organizer's guide. So, and I already said that the volunteer guide is kind of derived from that. I'll show you an example of that right away. But it's really helpful to have the volunteers understand what options and expectations will be for them as volunteers, including the time they have to come and the time they have to put into it and what tasks they're going to do.
And what equipment they need to bring.
Right. Yeah. Even if it's like water bottles and sunscreen.
And gloves or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And before they commit to being a volunteer. That way it gives the volunteers confidence with good background information, that they know what they're getting into, and they have a feeling by seeing this guide that things are well organized and they'll be taken care of. So it gives them more confidence. So here, let me just show you briefly, because we've already seen the other guide. I'll show you the volunteer guide that I have created. So let's just bring this down. So this is for last year. So in here you can see, I've got, this isn't like the organizer guide. It's a little more public. It's a little more, presentable to the public. So I got the greetings and thanks and preparing to volunteer, information about safety and, permissions for photos and further parking. All of this stuff is in here, the kit they're going to have and so on. And if you look through here, this is all the detail. It's got maps in here, all the event that's going on, all this information, the times. So the volunteers, when they come in, they know exactly what they're getting into. And so when they later on pick what they're volunteering, I have all the information here about all the different positions that they can volunteer into, the times, where they're going to be, and what their expectations are. So I've had good feedback from this, that most of the volunteers really appreciate this. They feel like they're really involved in the event. Okay. Okay. The next thing I have here is to create a volunteer sign up. So in my case, I've create an online sign up, and it allows intake of volunteers, self-service intake by the individuals. And this cuts down the initial communications, emails going back and forth, and all that kind of organization. And it provides a way of downloading the set to organize the information later on in terms of all the answers the volunteers have given.
Right.
So you can sort through and filter through and start allocating what volunteers are going where a lot easier. Okay. So you can outline the options with a link to the volunteer guide for more details. I'll show this right away. And you can cover off the setup volunteering, the event day volunteering for adults and or a kids event if you have an adult and a kids event, and for
the tear down.
and the tear down later on. So here, let me show you the example of this. Okay, so here is my online page I have. So they come in, they enter their email, there's a little thank you here. They put in their first and last name, their cell number, it's optional, and then their volunteer commitment. And here's the link to the guide. So they can click on this and it opens up the guide so they can go look at that. So here's some general volunteer activities, pre-race venue and race orientation. This allows them to come out and just get an orientation. Yeah, so that way they get an idea. Someone describes to them how the triathlon is going to work. That's just to give them more confidence, right? But this is the setup the day before that they can volunteer for as well. So then they can volunteer for the actual race blocks. So my event has an adult race in the morning, 10 and up, considered for the morning. And then we have from 4 to 9 in the afternoon. So in this case, they can come in and say, yeah, I will volunteer at the morning event, or I won't volunteer. And depending on what they pick here, if I say that I will volunteer, it goes in. Oh, of course, I have to enter all my information. Let me just say that when it goes in here, they say they will volunteer, it goes to another page and it says, well, we can't guarantee you'll be put into this role, but if you had a preference, what would you like to be? Where would you like to work? And then I have in there the volunteer sizing of their t-shirts and so on. Right. Okay, because they'll get t-shirts as well. If they say they will volunteer, then it goes to the afternoon kids event. Yeah. And in the adult one, they have the option at the end of the adult one of saying, hey, would you like to also volunteer for the kids one? So they can volunteer for both the morning and afternoon. And at the end of it all, they can provide some general comments and so on. So I have this online form that I'll be able to share, and so that you can sort of see how I set this up as well. Okay. So the next thing is start soliciting volunteers. Let me go back. Start soliciting your volunteers. Okay. So you got the information all set up. You got the draft volunteer guide going. 5 months out may seem early, but some people want to put on their calendars that far out, and you really want to miss out on potential volunteers. No. You might capture this early. No, you don't. So get on it. Even 5 months out. Online sign-up linkage can be distributed through multiple channels: email, the website, Facebook, posters, etc. Okay, and collect and retain your volunteer sign-up information to use in subsequent years. The first year you're going to be, scrambling, trying to get volunteers. Now you have a list for the next year that you can just build on, right? So you can use that email distribution tagging, like MailChimp or something like that, will allow you to tag volunteers as they volunteered now for this year's event versus last year, so that you can send out targeted emails depending on whether someone hasn't volunteered yet or has, right, for your event coming up. They can also be a source for future captains. So your volunteers, once they've got a few years in, they've gained some experience. They're obviously liking the idea of volunteering. If you lose a captain, there you go. You can use that too. All right. That's it for this session. We covered the 10 months prior to 5 months prior, and just set up for what's coming next. The next sessions, we're going to be going from Act 1 to Act 2 in our play, the script that we're writing, and it's going to be the 4 months to the 1 week prior to the event. And then the final session we're going to have is the actual event week and the days of the event, and then post-event information too. So that's coming up soon. Ending it off, thanks for your contributions. I hope that you've got an appreciation that there's lots of work, but by giving this, we want to make sure it gives you confidence coming in as a race director that you will have a successful event, and you're not going to be under a lot of stress because you might have not known about something or not done something at the proper timing. Okay, so thanks very much for your time. And there'll be a workshop after this, and we'll be part of that. And other than that, we'll be seeing you at the next session. All right. Thanks very much. Bye for now.
Bye.